The office of president has not, to me personally, a single allurement. I shrink from everything which another canvas and its result involve. I would avoid either if I would consult alone my comfort, my peace, my desire. My discomfort arises from a sense of duty to honest people and devoted friends. One thing I know. Forces are at work, which certainly mean the complete turning back of the hands of the dial of democracy and the destruction of party hopes. Is it ordained that I am to be the instrument through which democratic principles can be saved?
Those are the words of Grover Cleveland, our 24th president, and the subject of this, the 24th episode of the Dead Presidents Podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 24 of the Dead Presidents Podcast. Grover Cleveland, the comeback kid.
That's right. Grover Cleveland, part 2. He was the 22nd president. Then he's going to be the 24th president, meriting him 2 non-consecutive episodes.
That's just it. As always, I'm Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
And I'm James J. Hamilton.
And we're in for a second slice of Grover Cleveland.
Yeah, we last left the Clevelands on March 4th, 1889, when they left the White House upon the inauguration of 23rd President Benjamin Harrison.
And Francis Cleveland making a bit of a prophecy about returning to the presidency, but we'll see if that comes to pass. Spoiler alert, it does. He is the subject of this episode.
That's right.
But we got a pre-presidential interregnum period for Big Steve.
As you would think, for every other president, after they leave office, they're going to ride off into the sunset of post-presidential life and live out the rest of their days in relative obscurity.
That's it.
Maybe not so for Grover Cleveland.
That's right. After leaving the White House, the Clevelands are going to move to New York City, and they purchase a house on Madison Avenue. Cleveland is going to associate himself with a law firm of Bangs, Stetson, Tracy, and McVeigh. He doesn't become a partner in the firm, but he has his own office space, and his business consists primarily of serving as a court-appointed arbitrator and mediator. The Clevelands occasionally attend the theater, but they mostly keep to themselves and their small circle of friends.
Yep, and they also purchased a vacation home in Massachusetts on Buzzards Bay near Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard. They're going to call their cottage Gray Gables. They'll spend the summer there. Cleveland choosing the spot because it was great for fishing. He was a very serious fisherman. Once told a friend, quote, "If you want to catch fish, attend strictly to business."
There you go.
Cleveland attending to business not only out on the water as a fisherman, but also in the bedroom.
That's right. In October 1891, after more than 5 years of marriage, Francis gives birth to a daughter, Ruth Cleveland. This is Grover's first legitimate child.
That's right.
Now, Americans referred to the child as Baby Ruth. In 1921, 17 years after, spoiler alert, Baby Ruth's untimely death at the age of 12, the Curtis Candy Company renamed one of its candy bars Baby Ruth. Now, baseball legend Babe Ruth is at the height of his popularity at the time, and the candy company avoids paying him royalties by insisting that the candy bar is named for President Cleveland's long-dead daughter. However, in 1891, Baby Ruth was bringing her father great joy. He wrote to a friend, quote, "The Clevelands are at present the healthiest and happiest family in the world. I scarcely do anything just now but read the kindest messages of congratulation and receive in every possible way the manifestations of the kindness which pervades the people of the land.
Well, Cleveland sounds pretty happy in domestic bliss, but his political supporters are holding out hope that he will return to politics and once again run for president. He's not really socializing with politicians during this time. He's declining invitations to give speeches. And however, though he maintained the respectful silence of an ex-president refusing to criticize his successor, Cleveland was dismayed by the course of the Harrison administration. After having issued so many vetoes against pension bills, he deplored the passage of a general pension bill that was the biggest spending bill in the nation's history.
Yep.
After having argued in favor of lower tariffs, he deplored the passage of the McKinley tariff, which raised tariffs even higher. He wrote to his former Interior Secretary that he was amazed that, quote, such retrogression could be made in so short a time, and he predicted that the Republicans now in power were, quote, fast running off a rope which I believe is bound to get about their necks. And he was right, because in the 1890 midterm elections, there was a huge Democratic victory, enabling Democrats to take over the House of Representatives. And shortly after that election, Cleveland begins making public appearances and public statements. He went to Ohio to criticize the McKinley tariff and also criticized it at Madison Square Garden.
That's it. 1891, a big year for Grover Cleveland. We also have the silver letter of that year. The Harrison administration, they had passed the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, a compromise bill that expanded silver coinage. In February 1891, with even more expansive free silver proposals being considered in Congress, Cleveland decided to speak out against them, saying, quote, I am supposed to be a leader of my party. If any word of mine can check these dangerous fallacies, it is my duty to give that word, whatever the cost may be to me. Elements of both major parties supported free silver, and Cleveland's advisors worried that he might alienate potential supporters by coming out strongly against silver. But he pays no heed to their concerns, and he goes on to issue a public letter arguing that the free silver proposals under consideration constituted, quote, the greatest peril to the nation. Those proposals are not going to be passed, but Cleveland's silver letter announced his return to the political arena. Big Steve, GC, he's back. George Parker is going to begin a quiet campaign to promote Cleveland in the newspapers, putting together a book of his speeches and papers and sending copies to newspaper editors throughout the country.
That's right. And then as the 1892 Democratic Convention was approaching, Cleveland's supporters were constructing a very unconventional pro-Cleveland machine, consisting mostly of admirers that had no prior political involvement. His primary rival for the nomination would be David Hill, who had succeeded him as New York governor and was now a U.S. senator. Hill was backed by the Tammany Hall machine, which, as you remember, despises Grover Cleveland.
Right.
Hill was courting support among pro-silver Democrats, high-tariff Democrats, anybody who doesn't like Cleveland. And then Hill also rigged the New York State Convention to choose pro-Hill delegates to the Democratic National Convention. However, Hill was losing to Cleveland in a lot of other state conventions, choosing delegations to the National Convention. And when the Democratic Convention convened in Chicago in June, Cleveland supporters were led by his former Navy Secretary William Whitney. Cleveland, Hill, and Iowa Governor Horace Boyes were nominated, but Cleveland supporters were so well organized that he won the nomination on the first ballot, receiving 617 votes against 114 for Hill and 103 for Boyes.
Pretty crushing victory.
Mm-hmm. Well, he is the stature of being an ex-president.
That's right.
No one else in the Democratic Party has that stature. He also won the popular vote the last 2 times.
That's it.
Well, and then for vice president, the convention nominated a pro-silver candidate, Adlai Stevenson of Illinois, a former congressman who served as first assistant postmaster general in Cleveland's first administration and was known for replacing huge numbers of Republican postal appointees with Democrats. He is now also known as the grandfather of the Adlai Stevenson who was the Democratic nominee for president in 1952 and 56, losing both times to Dwight Eisenhower.
That's right. And that's going to bring us right on up to the 1892 general election. The Republican Party, they're going to renominate President Harrison on the first ballot at the Republican Convention, but only after the failure of an attempt to replace him with Secretary of State James G. Blaine, the party's 1884 nominee. Harrison had lost favor among both Republican machine bosses and civil service reformers. Both candidates also faced a major third-party challenger, the Populist Party, made up of pro-silver farmers who despised the railroads and Wall Street bankers. They had won 8 seats in the House of Representatives in 1890. They would go on to nominate former Union General James Weaver for president, and had a lot of support in western states where some Democrats supported the populist ticket to block Republicans. Harrison's campaign was further hampered by the seriously declining health of First Lady Caroline Harrison, which prevented Harrison from campaigning. She would die in late October. Cleveland himself doesn't do too much personal campaigning either, and none after First Lady Caroline Harrison's death. But Adlai Stevenson leads an energetic and well-funded Democratic campaign.
Cleveland met with David Hill and the Tammany machine bosses, and though he did not bend to their demands to control federal patronage in New York, they reluctantly agreed to support the Democratic ticket. On Election Day, Cleveland won a clear victory. He won both the major swing states of New York and Indiana, which he had lost to Harrison in '88, and he also captured Republican-leaning Illinois and Wisconsin. He won 277 electoral votes against 145 for Harrison and 22 for Weaver, who won 4 western states and got 8.5% of the popular vote.
Not too bad of a third-party showing.
No. Cleveland won the popular vote for the 3rd consecutive election.
Yeah. Pretty big feat.
Yep.
Only previously achieved by Andrew Jackson. And, of course, that would later be matched and exceeded by FDR, who's going to win it 4 consecutive times.
That's right. Cleveland will become the first, and as of this recording, only ex-president to be elected to a non-consecutive term. Ex-presidents who sought an additional non-consecutive term include Martin Van Buren in 1844, Millard Fillmore in 56, Ulysses S. Grant in 1880, and Theodore Roosevelt in 1912.
That's it.
As of this recording, the 45th president possibly considering trying to become the 47th president.
Yeah.
But no one so far but Grover Cleveland has made it happen.
That's it.
None of those other presidents we just mentioned got their major party nominations.
Right.
Millard Fillmore, of course, running as the know-nothing candidate. Theodore Roosevelt with the Bull Moose Progressive Party.
Right.
Martin Van Buren and Ulysses S. Grant both losing at their conventions and
That's it.
calling it quits. Van Buren ran again on the Free Soil Party.
That's right.
In 48.
Yeah.
But only Grover Cleveland.
That's it. Grover
Coming
Cleveland.
back.
Coming back to the White House, as Francis Cleveland predicted. And when we come back, we're going to learn all about Grover Cleveland's return to the presidency and whether or not it was a triumphant return. The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by A.E. Young, who publishes this important announcement. I can furnish several gun clubs with live quail. If you're like most of our listeners, you're an active member of multiple gun clubs, and you know the biggest challenge gun clubs face is obtaining sufficient numbers of live quail. We've all had days at the gun club where the few live quail on hand are all shot dead within the first 15 minutes, and you're forced to spend the rest of the afternoon tossing the carcasses up in the air and trying to shoot them before they hit the ground. Not anymore. Thanks to A.E. Young, your gun club will have all the live quail you can shoot, and the recreational killing could go on and on and on. That's a message from our sponsor, A.E. Young.
We're also proud to be sponsored by Mrs. Dr. Bell, who publishes this important notice. To ladies in trouble. Positive satisfaction is guaranteed by Mrs. Dr. Bell, who provides home comforts for patients while under treatment. Call upon her at 89 Warren Avenue in Boston. Listeners, if you're a quote-unquote lady in trouble, Mrs. Dr. Bell will ensure that your trouble is taken care of quickly, quietly, painlessly, and with no questions asked. Mrs. Dr. Bell doesn't need to know how you got in trouble. Her only concern is getting you out of it.
Or should we say, getting it out of you.
Exactly. That's a message from our sponsor, Mrs. Dr. Bell.
And because some ladies didn't get to Mrs. Dr. Bell in time and carried their trouble to full term, we're proud to be sponsored by Mrs. E.A. Dean, adoption agent for Protestant children. Mrs. Dean currently has available for adoption baby boys from 1 week to 2 years of age and several girl babies from 1 week to 2 months of age. All are strong, healthy babes. Apply to Mrs. Dean at 375 13th Street. Listeners, Mrs. Dean is the premier source for the finest Protestant babies. These babies reject papal supremacy and believe that the Bible is the only infallible source of divine authority. They believe in salvation by faith alone, by grace alone, in Christ alone. If you want a staunchly Protestant baby to join your family, call Mrs. Dean today.
We're also proud to be sponsored by Mrs. Rose Lane, Catholic adoption agent. Mrs. Lane currently has available 3 baby girls, including a pretty dark-eyed baby girl 2 months old, and several nice baby boys, including a beautiful blonde boy 1 month old. Apply to Mrs. Lane at 190 Front Avenue. Listeners, you don't want to adopt a child only to turn around and see them nailing 95 theses to your door. For good Catholic babies, turn to Mrs. Lane. These babies believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. They confess one baptism for the forgiveness of sins. They look forward to the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. And what's more, these babies love the Pope. They just can't get enough of him. If you love the Pope too, and you want a baby who knows that faith without works is dead, look to Mrs. Lane for all your adoption needs.
Yeah, and you'll end up with a child who won't listen to you because they'll only listen to their king in the pointy hat what sits on his throne in Rome. May the Christian Lord guide Mrs. Dean's hand against Mrs. Lane's Roman popery.
Forgive him, Lord, he knows not what he says. And now, back to the show.
And we're back and ready to dive in to the second presidency of Grover Cleveland.
That's right. First Lady Nancy Reagan and her astrologer got nothing on the predictive powers of First Lady Frances Cleveland.
That's right.
It's March 4th, 1893, saw the fulfillment of Frances's prophecy of March 4th, 1889, and the Clevelands returned to the White House 4 years to the day from when they left it.
That's right.
Cleveland's second inauguration, however, was marred by a blizzard that coated Washington with snow and ice, keeping away the usual large crowd that would gather to witness a president take office. Cleveland once again delivered his inaugural address from memory. He spoke in favor of lowering tariffs, reestablishing the gold standard, and reining in monopolies. Speaking of monopolies, the Democratic Party had captured a majority of the Senate and held on to a huge House majority, giving it full control of the presidency and both houses of Congress for the first time since the election of 1858.
Yeah, that's a big deal. The Democrats hadn't made too much headway, but here they are, taking full control as Grover Cleveland returns. That's going to bring us to appointments. Cleveland is going to make it a point of not reappointing any cabinet secretaries from his first administration. His longtime close advisors Daniel Lamont and Wilson Bissell were named War Secretary and Postmaster General. As Secretary of State, he named Walter Q. Gresham, a recent convert to the Democratic Party, who had served as Postmaster General and Treasury Secretary during the Arthur administration and had been Benjamin Harrison's rival for leadership of the Indiana Republican Party, as well as a contender for the 1888 Republican presidential nomination. Richard Olney of Massachusetts, a leading railroad lawyer, became Attorney General.
It's the new Cleveland team.
That's it. And as a team, they got some issues to tackle.
Well, right off the bat, Cleveland is inheriting the issue of Hawaii. You'll recall from the Harrison episode, in the final months of the Harrison administration, the American-dominated business class of the Kingdom of Hawaii led an overthrow of the island's queen and then asked to be annexed by the United States. The coup was abetted by a sympathetic American ambassador who called in U.S. Marines to, quote, keep the peace. Harrison sent an annexation treaty to the Senate, which declined to act in the final days of his administration. A growing number of Americans felt that the United States should join the great European powers in the race to acquire imperial possessions. Cleveland, however, opposed American imperialism and promptly withdrew the annexation treaty from the Senate's consideration.
That's right. Cleveland is going to send anti-imperialist former Congressman James Blount to investigate conditions in Hawaii, and Blount recommends that the U.S. forcibly reinstate the Queen, though the Queen indicated that she would harshly retaliate against those who overthrew her. Cleveland is going to refer the matter to Congress, saying, quote, "It seemed to me the only honorable course for our government to pursue was to undo the wrong that had been done by those representing us and to restore as far as practicable the status at the time of our forcible intervention." There's going to be little support for restoring the Queen, and Hawaii is going to continue for the time being as an independent republic, with Cleveland recognizing its Republican government. The issues of Hawaiian annexation and American imperialism are going to resurface under the next president.
Big time. Well, Cleveland's going to have a problem.
Yeah.
In his second presidency, because in the very first months of his new administration, the nation is going to be struck by an economic depression that's going to go on for 4 years.
Yeah.
Many factors contributed to the Panic of 1893, including economic troubles in Europe, particularly the failure of a major British bank caused by a financial crisis in Argentina. You also had a very poor American cotton crop yield in 1892, and you had the bursting of a bubble of overinvestment in railroads, sparked by the failure of the overextended Philadelphia and Reading Railroad. Cleveland also believed that a major factor was the 1890 Sherman Silver Purchase Act, which sharply increased U.S. coinage of silver currency and made silver certificates redeemable in gold, leading to a depletion of U.S. gold reserves.
That's right.
All these issues combined to cause a stock market crash in May 1893, which led in turn to a wave of 500 bank failures, 15,000 businesses closing, 25% of railroads going into receivership, widespread farm failures, mortgage foreclosures, and massive unemployment. It was the worst depression in American history up to the time.
That's it. It's not looking too good. And that's going to bring us back to silver and gold, silver and gold. Because Cleveland is going to call a special session of Congress and urge the repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. He puts together a coalition of Democrats and Eastern Republicans to support the repeal and uses his influence to squash attempts at a compromise bill that would retain some pro-silver policies. The repeal, however, did not restore investor confidence, and the nation continues to sink into depression. The depletion of government gold reserves continues, although at a slower rate, until 1895. Now, that is when banking magnate J.P. Morgan, who had close ties to the New York law firm Cleveland had been associated with and had been on friendly terms with him during his interregnum, demanded a meeting with the president. Morgan proposes to save the U.S. government's precarious finances with a major deal in which the U.S. would purchase 3.5 million ounces of gold from Morgan and Rothschild banks for $60 million in high-yield government bonds. Cleveland is going to agree with the stipulation that at least half the gold come from abroad. Now, the deal is going to help stabilize the currency, but it also leads to huge profits for the bankers involved, fueling criticism that McKinley is in the pocket of financial tycoons. Cleveland's political philosophy, which in his first term produced a veto message for a bill to aid Texas farmers, saying, quote, "Though the people support the government should not support the people," was not well suited to provide comfort to a population suffering from economic deprivation. Though the Panic of 1893's causes largely preceded Cleveland's inauguration, his actions in response did little to alleviate the nation's plight, and he was increasingly blamed for the Depression.
That's right. The early months of his second term involved not only a national economic crisis, but a personal health crisis.
That's right.
A lesion in his mouth, possibly caused by his use of chewing tobacco, was diagnosed as cancer. Total secrecy was maintained as to his condition, and a cloak and dagger surgery was arranged to keep the public in the dark.
That's right. Now, this is a pretty huge deal. The president is, well, deathly ill and needs major surgery, and nobody knows about it.
No, and they're not gonna know, because on July 1st, 1893, Cleveland will board a friend's yacht in New York City for an apparently routine voyage to his Buzzards Bay vacation home. However, while the boat is en route, he will get surgery. The boat has been outfitted as a floating hospital. Cleveland is anesthetized with ether while sitting in a chair that is lashed to the ship's mast.
Right.
Surgeons remove his entire left upper jaw, and he was soon fitted with a rubber prosthetic jaw that left his appearance and speech unaffected. Although the portly Cleveland ended up losing a considerable amount of weight from this ordeal.
That's right. Yeah, they went in there to cut out this malignant tumor, basically, in his jaw. And then when they got in there, they saw that it was a lot worse than they had thought. And they ended up having to remove a good hunk of his jaw. Quite a feat.
Wow. Yeah, and all totally secret, there was a cover story that Cleveland had merely had 2 teeth extracted, And the truth remained hidden. The nation knew nothing about it until 1917.
Yeah.
When one of the surgeons spilled the beans in a newspaper article.
That's right. Pretty crazy stuff.
I guess it was probably true that he had 2 teeth removed along with the rest of his jaw.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a pretty serious thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he very easily could have died. So there's some criticism there because it's a little bit irresponsible. Because if he would have died, it would have been like, well, what the fuck happened?
Mm-hmm.
And Adlai Stevenson would have been like, oh shit.
Yeah. And,
but, you know,
well,
speaking of oh shit, as Cleveland is losing weight, the First Lady is gaining some weight. Turns out there's a bun in the oven. On September 9th, 1893, a couple months after the president's surgery, Frances gives birth to a second daughter, Esther Cleveland, who became the first and only child of a president to be born in the White House. Frances writes to a friend, quote, "She is a sweet baby, looking much like Ruth did at her age, with dark eyes and hair. All here are pleased that she is a girl, however disappointed the nation may be." Less than 2 years later, on July 7th, 1895, another presidential daughter, Marion, was born, this time at the Cleveland's Buzzard Bay vacation home.
the Clevelands adding to their family.
Indeed.
Cleveland escaping cancer. But the darkening clouds over the nation for his second term. Cleveland trying to escape the trend of presidents really never being more successful in their second term than in their first.
That's it.
Maybe Cleveland thinks that by breaking the 2 terms up with 4 years, he can beat that trend, but it doesn't seem to be how it's going so far.
Yeah, he comes back thinking back in business and ain't it grand? Let the good times roll. But the times aren't rolling the way that he wants them to.
He kind of rolled off a cliff there.
Indeed.
Very Martin Van Buren-like, where Martin Van Buren got in there, and as soon as he came in, a economic panic occurred.
That's it. In Cleveland, taking some blame for it.
Well, we're going to get into the rest of his second term right after these words from our sponsors.
Thanks for listening.
The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by Emma Bust Developer. Attention, ladies! Mail a 2-cent stamp to receive sealed instructions for enlarging your busts 5 inches using Emma Bust Developer, absolutely guaranteed. Our 24-page illustrated catalog will be mailed for 6 cents. Address your correspondence to Emma Toilet Bazaar, 224 Tremont Street, Boston, Massachusetts. You heard that, ladies. Your days of disappointing flat-chestedness are over. Thanks to Emma Bust Developer, you're going to be rocking huge, heaving bosoms and turning heads everywhere you go. Fellas, Emma Bust Developer is the perfect Christmas or Valentine's Day gift for that special lady in your life. And even if there's no lady in your life, you might want to break off 6 cents and send away for that 24-page illustrated catalog. I wouldn't mind taking a close look at that myself.
I'll second that.
Emma Bust Developer is the future, and the future is big busted. That's a message from our sponsor, Emma Bust Developer.
Keeping it buxom. Now, a message from our sponsor, the N.K. Fairbank Company, makers of Santa Claus Soap. Santa Claus Soap is made to wash clothes as they should be washed. It distinguishes friend from foe, your clothes from the dirt, and spares one while it strikes the other. It makes clothes whiter than any other soap. It saves time and work, and does not injure the hands or the clothes. Santa Claus Soap. Bright housewives use no other. Sold everywhere. Made only by the N.K. Fairbank Company. Listeners, we here at the Dead Presidents Podcast can spot a dumb housewife from a mile away. She's walking around with injured hands, and she and her unlucky husband are both wearing tattered and dirty clothes. That's all because she used the wrong soap. If you don't want to be like her, it's pretty simple. Use Santa Claus soap. Unlike other soaps, it can tell the difference between clothes and dirt, so it doesn't destroy your clothes while leaving them dirty. And best of all, you won't have to pay a doctor to treat the debilitating hand injuries commonly caused by lesser soaps. Housewives, don't embarrass your husbands. Use Santa Claus soap. That's a message from our sponsor, the N.K. Fairbank Company.
We're also proud to be sponsored by Edwards & Company, divorce specialists. Edwards & Company can obtain divorces for persons residing in any county on grounds of desertion, cruelty, adultery, non-support, drunkenness, and more. Edwards & Company provides free advice and offers easy installment terms. They have 18 years experience and the highest references. Call on them at 175 Washington Street. Listeners, is your spouse a serial adulterer? Is your spouse an irredeemable drunkard? Does she keep injuring her hands and your clothes with inferior soap? Then Edwards & Company can get you a divorce. You have value as a person. You deserve to be happy, and you certainly deserve better than someone who beats you, cheats on you, or is bad at doing laundry. Call Edwards & Company and get the ball rolling on that divorce today. That's a message from our sponsor, Edwards & Company.
And now, back to the show. And we're back. Grover Cleveland, having a tough time here, readjusting to the presidency, and, well, things might not be looking up anytime soon.
No, he's going to dive back into the issue of tariffs, which he had been pushing for lower tariffs since his first term. Then the Harrison administration turns around, raises tariffs with the McKinley tariff. Republicans arguing that high tariffs protect American industries and thereby assure plentiful jobs and high wages for American workers, while Democrats argue that tariffs raise prices of goods and hurt consumers. Cleveland's second administration proposed to roll back the McKinley tariff, with Cleveland co-writing a bill with West Virginia Representative William Wilson to lower tariff rates. And the revenue lost by reduced tariffs would be made up by a 2% personal income tax on incomes over $4,000. A federal income tax had been imposed during the Civil War, but it was repealed in 1872.
That's right.
Income tax pretty controversial.
Indeed. Now, the bill is going to pass the House, but it faces strong opposition in the Senate, where over 600 amendments dilute its efforts to lower tariffs. Finally passed in July 1894, the Wilson-Gorman Tariff Act lowered the average tariff rates from 49% to 42%. Cleveland is so disgusted by the final bill that he refuses to sign it, and instead allows it to become law without his signature. The following year, the Supreme Court rules that the income tax is unconstitutional on the grounds that the Constitution requires that direct taxes be apportioned among the states according to their population. In 1913, the 16th Amendment was ratified, giving Congress the power to tax incomes without apportionment.
Yep.
The good old days before the income tax.
Yep. When a 2% income tax was considered outrageous.
Yeah. Not only outrageous, but unconstitutional.
Yep. Economic situation not really getting much better for Cleveland. In 1894, you got an Ohio businessman, Jacob Coxey, advocating a plan to alleviate unemployment through a national road building program, some public works. And in order to lobby the federal government to act on his plan, Coxey organized a protest march on Washington. It left from Ohio on March 25th, 1894, with 100 men, mostly unemployed men. The group becomes known as Coxey's Army, and it's going to grow to 6,000 people at one point.
Wow.
But by the time it reaches Washington on May 1st, it had dwindled down to just 500. Cleveland had ordered Secret Service agents to keep an eye on the group. The march is going to end anticlimactically when Coxey is arrested for trespassing on the lawn of the U.S. Capitol and is sentenced to 20 days in jail and a $5 fine.
Wow. So much for Coxey's Army. 1894, pretty big year. We got the Pullman strike coming up. Popular discontent over the Depression is going to reach its peak summer 1894. The Pullman Company, a major manufacturer of railroad cars, it has its main factory in Chicago, where its employees live in a quote-unquote company town. When the Pullman Company cuts employee wages by 25%, without lowering any of the rents or prices in its company town, 4,000 factory employees go on strike. The American Railway Union, run by Eugene V. Debs, organized many of the striking workers into the ARU. When the Pullman Company refused to recognize or negotiate with the ARU, it called a national boycott, and its members refused to service any trains that carried Pullman cars. Now, the strike is going to grow to 250,000 workers in 27 states, and most of the railroads west of Detroit are paralyzed. The railroads, as well as the Union of Conductors and Engineers, vigorously oppose the strike. Riots in Chicago leave 30 dead, and there were as many as 40 deaths in other states, along with $80 million in property damages.
This is getting pretty serious.
It is getting very serious. And when the post office gets to the point where it's unable to deliver mail, Cleveland considers the strike a direct challenge to the federal government, and he unleashes Attorney General Richard Olney, a longtime railroad lawyer, to lead a federal intervention.
Yep, Olney is going to obtain a federal court injunction against the Union, and the U.S. Army is called in to enforce it. This against the protest of the Democratic governor of Illinois, who said he didn't need federal troops. Cleveland not agreeing. He said, quote, "If it takes the entire Army and Navy of the United States to deliver a postcard in Chicago, that card will be delivered."
Yes, sir.
12,000 soldiers were dispatched. Those soldiers ensured that the trains started to run again. The postcards were delivered. Eugene V. Debs was charged with conspiracy to obstruct the mail, and he was defended by Clarence Darrow, famous lawyer. He's
Scopes monkey trial.
That's right.
Hasn't happened yet, but that'll be coming up. That's Clarence Darrow.
Have multiple players in the Scopes monkey trial will be mentioned in this episode.
Indeed.
First being Clarence Darrow. He's going to secure the dismissal of Debs' conspiracy to obstruct the mail charge. However, Debs will be convicted of violating the injunction. He served 6 months in prison. That injunction case vindicated the president's power to intervene in labor disputes affecting interstate commerce. In 1897, Debs will found the Socialist Party, and he's going to be its candidate for president in 1904, 1908, 1912, and 1920. And he's going to be receiving between about 3% and 6% of the popular vote in those elections.
That's right. Convict number 9653. The Warshouts, who we've mentioned before, They did a pretty killer song about Eugene Debs.
Yep. He is a would-be president.
Indeed. And that's going to bring us to civil rights. So, Benjamin Harrison, as you'll recall, had been an advocate for African American civil rights, and he worked pretty vigorously to secure the passage of a bill sponsored by Henry Cabot Lodge that would have protected black voting rights by increasing federal supervision of elections and giving federal officials power to override southern state governors in certifying vote totals and election winners. Congressional Democrats successfully filibustered the bill during the Harrison administration, and in 1892, Democrats used it as a campaign issue, gaining the support of white supremacists by stoking fears of black supremacy. After winning full control of Congress and the presidency, Democrats were not only safe from increased federal involvement, but were able to turn back the clock. In 1894, Cleveland signed off on the repeal of the Enforcement Act of 1871, which provided some baseline of federal election oversight. In 1896, in the case of Plessy v. Ferguson, the Supreme Court upheld racial segregation on the grounds of, quote, separate but equal, a decision that Cleveland is said to have, quote, applauded. Unfortunately, Grover Cleveland's views on race are pretty characteristic of the Democratic Party of his time. He has been quoted as saying, quote, among blacks, there is a grievous amount of ignorance, a sad amount of viciousness, and a tremendous amount of laziness and thriftlessness. In 1903, he remarked, quote, I believe that neither the decree which made slaves free, nor the enactment that suddenly invested them with the rights of citizenship, any more cured them of their racial and slavery-bred imperfections and deficiencies than it changed the color of their skin. Ouch.
Yikes.
What an asshole.
You had Benjamin Harrison on the other side of that, pushing for what could have been a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
That Lodge bill.
Yeah, we've talked about Garfield's attitude with civil rights and Harrison taking the mantle, so to speak, and Cleveland just absolutely shutting it down, pretty much. You know, it is what it is.
Well, Cleveland and the Democrats in power, they're able to turn back the clock of civil rights, but they're also going to be blamed for this ongoing economic depression.
That's right.
When the 1894 midterm elections roll around, it's going to be a Republican landslide. Democrats lost over 100 seats in the House.
Yeah.
Turning a solid Democrat majority into a huge Republican majority.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest shifts in history.
Yeah, 1890, also a huge shift in the Democrats' favor, and then 4 years later, right back. Democrats also lose several Senate seats, their narrow majority becoming a narrow Republican majority. And Republicans are going to control both houses of Congress for the next 16 years.
Yeah.
The Populist Party won 9 House seats and 4 Senate seats in this time, maintaining itself as a pretty substantial third party.
That's just it. And when you're talking about Grover Cleveland, you got to talk about vetoes.
Well, especially now that he's having a Republican Congress.
That's right. Now, in Grover Cleveland's first term, he issued 414 vetoes, including 110 pocket vetoes, which still stands as a record for a single presidential term. Now, most of these vetoes were of private pension bills, and even though the Harrison administration would pass a major general pension bill, the practice of private pension bills continued during Cleveland's second term, and he continues to veto them. He was fiercely protective of public money, and was generally suspicious of pension applicants, stating, quote, "I am unable to understand why frauds in the pension rolls should not be exposed and corrected with thoroughness and vigor. Thousands of neighborhoods have their well-known fraudulent pensioners." Cleveland's second term is going to see 170 vetoes, including 128 pocket vetoes. His two-term total of 584 vetoes is a record for 2 terms and was far greater than the number of vetoes issued by all previous presidents combined, which was only 250. Only FDR, 4-term president, could beat Cleveland's record, issuing 635 vetoes. Cleveland is responsible for approximately 22% of all vetoes in American history to date, and his veto total is more than 10 times the presidential average.
Wow. Grover Cleveland certainly earning his reputation as the veto president.
Indeed.
He is not afraid to veto anything.
No, absolutely not. Wielding the veto like a battle axe is Grover Cleveland.
Indeed.
And speaking of wielding things, one thing we've talked about, I think it came up in Chester Arthur, and has been progressing a little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit of naval modernization going on.
That's right. Cleveland is going to continue the policy of modernization and expansion of the U.S. Navy that had been ongoing since the Arthur administration. Cleveland's Navy Secretary, Hillary Herbert, had been chairman of the House Committee on Naval Affairs and was a strong supporter of increasing naval power. During the second Cleveland administration, Congress ordered 5 new battleships and 16 torpedo boats.
That's it. They're getting the Navy up to standards.
It's going to be pretty formidable, as we're going to hear all about in the next episode.
That's right. It's absolutely going to come in handy. But that's going to bring us to Venezuela. In 1895, the U.S. is going to become involved in a border dispute between Venezuela and British Guiana, when an American lobbyist working for Venezuela advanced the argument that Britain's actions violated the Monroe Doctrine. That old Monroe Doctrine. Always popping up.
It's coming back.
Indeed. When Secretary of State Walter Gresham died earlier that year, Cleveland named Attorney General Richard Olney as his replacement. Olney produced a report forcefully arguing that the Monroe Doctrine entitled the U.S., quote, to resent and resist any sequestration of Venezuelan soil by Great Britain. Cleveland is going to send a special message to Congress invoking the Monroe Doctrine and arguing that the U.S. had a duty to resist this, quote, willful aggression upon its rights and interests. Britain, they're going to initially dismiss arguments on the applicability of the Monroe Doctrine, and they refuse an American demand to submit the dispute to international arbitration. But Cleveland's forceful stance is seen as an implied threat of war, and the British cave and agree to arbitrate the dispute. As our listeners will recall from episode 23, ex-President Benjamin Harrison represented Venezuela before the arbitration tribunal, which ruled mostly in favor of the British position. You'll remember his, 25-hour-long closing argument that he gave?
Yep. Well, a victory for the Monroe Doctrine.
Indeed.
And
the ever-important Monroe Doctrine.
Yep. A president using a forceful stance to back down a European power.
That's right.
Speaking of European powers in the Western Hemisphere, it's also 1895. Cubans are going to launch a war of independence against their Spanish colonial overlords. Many Americans sympathizing with the Cuban rebels' cause and demanding that the United States intervene on their side. Cleveland issued a neutrality proclamation and warned against any American adventurers attempting to participate. He maintained the stance of neutrality throughout the rest of his term against increasing public opinion in favor of intervention.
That's right.
We're definitely teasing what's going to be happening in episode 25.
That's right. And that's going to bring us around to the election of 1896. Of course, the Panic of 1893 pretty badly damaged Cleveland's popularity among Democrats, and the party's center of gravity is going to shift away from Cleveland's eastern conservative pro-business wing. At the 1896 Democratic National Convention, the populist pro-silver movement is going to take control of the Democratic Party, and Cleveland is going to be denounced as a tool of Wall Street.
Ouch.
The convention is going to choose as its presidential nominee a former House member from Nebraska, the 36-year-old William Jennings Bryan, who accepted the nomination with his iconic Cross of Gold speech in which he proclaimed, quote, "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." A fantastic speech.
Indeed. Brian, of course, another eventual Scopes Monkey trial participant.
That's right.
The Populist Party is going to join forces with the Democrats here by naming Bryan as their nominee as well. And then you're going to have a splinter group of Democrats who are dedicated to the gold standard, the so-called Gold Democrats. They're going to ask Cleveland to seek a third term as their nominee. He's going to refuse outright to consider anything like that. He's done. The Gold Democrats are going to nominate Illinois Senator John Palmer and former Confederate General and Kentucky Governor Simon Bolivar Buckner. They're going to receive less than 1% of the popular vote, although Cleveland himself and most of his cabinet, unalterably opposed to free silver, are going to be quiet supporters of the Gold Democrats.
That's right.
That less than 1% probably included Cleveland's own personal vote.
That's it.
He's just not going over to the silver side.
He's standing steadfast. And the Republicans on the other side are going to nominate Ohio Governor William McKinley, famous for the McKinley Tariff, who is going to go on to win a decisive victory over Bryan. Cleveland preferred McKinley to Bryan and saw the election as a vindication of the gold standard. McKinley, in turn, also admires Cleveland, and when they meet at the White House in the days prior to the inauguration, McKinley asks Cleveland about the measures he had taken to avoid war with Spain and expresses his hope that he could maintain Cleveland's policy of neutrality. Remember that.
We'll see about that.
Francis saying tearful goodbyes to the White House staff before attending McKinley's inauguration. And then the Clevelands are leaving Washington, ready to begin their post-presidential life for the second time.
Right. This time, no predictions of returning. Cleveland really ready to retire this time.
That's it. And we'll see what he gets into when we come back from these messages.
The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by an anonymous sponsor known only as Mr. A, who publishes this important notice. Wanted. To meet a lady of stout build, one who can appreciate a true friend. Object, matrimony. Address your correspondence to A at the office of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Listeners, if you're a single lady of stout build, our sponsor, Mr. A, could be the Prince Charming you've been waiting for. He's got a glass slipper that will only fit a stout foot, And that lucky foot could be yours. You could be the new Mrs. A, provided, of course, that you know how to appreciate a true friend. Mr. A doesn't want an unappreciative bride, no matter how stout she is. And if you're a tall, thin single lady, move along. There's nothing to see here. That's a message from our sponsor, Mr. A.
We're also proud to be sponsored by Lillian Drake, who has a personal ad of her own. A widow, aged 26, unfortunate in the loss of an eye, with $42,000, would marry a respectable man capable of managing her business. Address your correspondence to Lillian Drake at the Central Bank Building in Chicago. For all our eligible bachelor listeners out there, while our sponsor Lillian Drake probably lost you at loss of an eye, she may have gotten you back at $42,000. That's a nice little chunk of change, and should be enough to make you look the other way on Lillian's inability to look the other way. With how they make glass eyes nowadays, you can hardly tell. But don't bother contacting Lillian unless you're a respectable man capable of managing her business. She's not interested in some gold-digging freeloader. And just to save her from potentially unseemly correspondence, definitely don't contact her with an empty eye socket fetish bullshit. Lillian ain't that kind of girl, and this ain't that kind of podcast. That's a message from our sponsor, Lillian Drake.
Now an important message from our sponsor, Dr. Duran's Heart Tablets. A boon to smokers. You cannot smoke to excess without experiencing what is termed by the best medical authority as the tobacco heart. Most cases of heart disease arise from this source. Nicotine poisoning causes derangement of the heart and circulation. The following letter from a well-known New York clubman speaks volumes for Dr. Duran's Heart Tablets, the only positive remedy for all diseases of the heart and impeded circulation.
Gentlemen, my physician ordered me to stop smoking, and when I assured him I could not, he prescribed your heart tablets. I have used 3 boxes, and can now smoke incessantly without feeling any nervousness or that former pain in the region of the heart. I sleep better than I have for years, and consider them the best medicine ever devised by man. Enclosed, find a check for $20 for 1 dozen boxes for some of my club friends. Sincerely yours, Percy Lambert.
Dr. Duran's Heart Tablets are for sale by all druggists, price $2 a box, or they will be sent by mail upon receipt of payment. Address all orders to Duran Heart Tablet Company, 120 Tremont Street, Boston, Massachusetts.
Listeners, do you want to keep smoking incessantly while avoiding those pesky ill health effects such as the dreaded tobacco heart? After a few boxes of Dr. Duran's Heart Tablets, your chest pains will subside, and you can go back to puffing on a cigarette literally every waking moment. If they can keep Percy Lambert's heart beating, they'll certainly work wonders for you. That's a message from our sponsor, Dr. Duran's Heart Tablets.
And now, back to the show.
And we're back, and ready to get into the second post-presidential life of old Grover Cleveland.
Yep.
Now, thinking that their former home of New York City might not be the best place to raise their young family, Clevelands are going to choose a new place to settle down, Princeton, New Jersey. Cleveland is going to befriend Princeton University Classics professor Andrew West, and eventually he becomes trustee of the university. Cleveland had actually never attended college himself, if you'll remember from episode 22, and he had previously refused offers of honorary degrees, finally accepting an honorary degree from Princeton. Now here, Cleveland is going to develop an icy relationship with university president and future U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, when Cleveland sides with Andrew West in a clash with Wilson over the location of a proposed graduate school. Pretty interesting. Worlds colliding here.
Mm-hmm.
Woodrow Wilson, the dean of Princeton, butting heads with Grover Cleveland a little bit.
The two Democratic presidents between the Civil War and World War II.
That's it. Because, spoiler alert, the next Democratic president we're going to see is Woodrow Wilson.
Yep. Not on the same page with Cleveland. Well, Cleveland's young family going to continue to grow in his retirement.
Indeed.
In 1897 and again in 1903, Francis will give birth to sons. Two sons, Richard, that would be Richard Folsom Cleveland, and then Francis Grover Cleveland. Upon Francis's birth, Cleveland is going to write to a friend, quote, "The shameless little naked scoundrel weighed over 9 pounds. His brother Richard was very much tickled as long as he thought it was something on the doll line, and was quite overcome with laughter when he found it was a real baby. The dear mother is as well apparently as possible, and seems to me very self-conceitedly happy, as if she thought she had done a good job."
But not all is sunshine and rainbows, unfortunately. And in 1904, the family is struck by tragedy when the 12-year-old Ruth dies of diphtheria. Cleveland, absolutely devastated, writes, quote, "It seems to me I mourn our darling Ruth's death more and more. So much of the time I can only think of her as dead, not joyfully living in heaven." He later wrote, quote, "God has come to my help, and I am able to adjust my thought to dear Ruth's death with as much comfort and selfish humanity will permit."
Well, Cleveland has a lot of other stuff going on in his retirement, keeping himself busy. In 1902, President Theodore Roosevelt, his old friend back from New York state politics days.
That's right, you'll remember the big one and the dude.
Well, the dude is going to ask the big one to join a commission to address a major coal miners' strike. Cleveland agreed, but then the pro-labor interests would not accept his appointment given his past history in breaking the Pullman strike.
That's it.
In 1904, Cleveland published a book, Presidential Problems, describing his approach to the crises of his presidencies. That same year, some Democrats hoped Cleveland would be a candidate for their party's presidential nomination, but he's going to decline. Not going to go for a third non-consecutive term.
Nope.
Cleveland also wrote a series of articles on hunting and fishing, which were collected and published in a book. And then, in 1905, he contributed an article to the Ladies' Home Journal, in which he weighed in on the women's suffrage movement, writing that, quote, "Sensible and responsible women do not want to vote. The relative positions to be assumed by men and women in the working out of our civilization were assigned long ago by a higher intelligence than ours."
Yeah.
That classic issue of Ladies' Home Journal.
That's right. Also in 1905, Cleveland is going to accept a position as a trustee of the Equitable Life Insurance Company, and in 1907, he becomes head of an insurance industry watchdog organization, the President's Association of Life Insurance Companies. Cleveland is also mentioned as a possible candidate for U.S. Senator from New Jersey in 1906.
Well, it
Doesn't come to fruition.
No. But he made a lot of money in his retirement in the insurance industry and other things, really accumulating a little nest egg for his young family.
Indeed.
Because he's not going to be around that much longer.
That's right. You got to remember, he's significantly older than his wife.
That's right.
And by 1908, his health is in pretty serious decline.
Yep, he suffered from gastrointestinal disease, kidney disorders, and heart problems. And after suffering a heart attack, he died at his home in Princeton on June 24th, 1908, at the age of 71. His last words, they were number 3 on our list of top 5 presidential last words. I have tried so hard to do right.
Yep.
After a private funeral that was attended by President Roosevelt, Cleveland was buried in Princeton Cemetery beside his beloved daughter, Ruth.
That's it. And that's the end of Grover Cleveland, but what's going to become of the Cleveland family? Well, in 1913, 5 years after Cleveland's death, the 48-year-old Frances became the first presidential widow to remarry when she married Thomas Preston, an archaeology professor from her alma mater, Wells College. When Frances died in 1947 at age 83, she was buried next to President Cleveland. Their daughter Esther married a British soldier in 1918, moved to England, and became a notable philanthropist. Esther's daughter, Philippa Foote, was a leading philosopher of ethics. Marion Cleveland attended Columbia University Teacher College and worked for the Girl Scouts of America. Richard Folsom Cleveland graduated from Princeton and Harvard Law School and went on to represent Whittaker Chambers in the Alger-Hiss case. Frances Grover Cleveland graduated from Harvard and became a theater actor, director, and producer.
Wow.
The Cleveland Brood, not doing too awful bad.
No. And Grover Cleveland, I guess, didn't do too bad for himself. His second term, not as successful as the first, as usual among presidents. Really rather bleak second term.
That's it.
Cleveland, he stuck to his guns.
He did.
He maintained himself. He was himself to the end.
That's about it. And just who was Grover Cleveland? Well, let's reference the complete book of U.S. presidents here. He is described as a massive, hulking figure, 250 pounds, the heaviest president up to that time. He was 5'11", great bull neck, strong jaw, double chin, ham-like fists.
Well, his jaw was strong for a while, and then it became cancerous.
That's it. I mean, his health generally was sound, but, you know, he had that malignant cancerous tumor in his mouth, of course, and that's no good. Personality-wise, Alan Nevins, Grover Cleveland biographer, observed that Cleveland had something of a dual personality. Quote, to the end of his life, his intimates were struck by the gulf which separated the exuberant, jovial Cleveland of occasional hours of carefree banter and the stern, unbending Cleveland of work and responsibility, whose life seemed hung round by a pall of duty. He had a quick temper and spoke bluntly.
Yep, he's a pretty hard-working, no-nonsense guy in the political realm. But then when he's with his family, able to be a little more personable.
Yeah, he looked up to James K. Polk a little bit in terms of work ethic, and he actually went and visited the widow, Sarah Polk, who was still alive at the time Cleveland was president. And he actually went down to Polk Place and spent the day with her
Mm-hmm.
No doubt discussing her husband.
Yep. The perils of being a workaholic president.
That's right.
Yeah, Cleveland probably the most workaholic president since Polk.
Yeah, I would say.
Well, maybe Lincoln, kind of forced into it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, Cleveland, definitely a workaholic. And I think that's part of what brought him back into the presidency. Most people don't want to do that again once they get out. But handful of presidents have been willing to try.
Look at all the quotes from presidents that are leaving that say, like, I'm just glad to be getting out of here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Cleveland was kind of like that, too, as he left the first time. But once he gets back on the outside, he needs something to do.
That's it. Situation dictated, climb back into the ring. And that he did. For better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
He's another one of them presidents that, when you look at presidents that had 2 terms, second term generally is weaker. Cleveland, no exception.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's going to bring us to our book recommendations. There's some pretty good books on Grover Cleveland. We'll start with the aforementioned Alan Nevins, who wrote a 2-volume biography of Grover Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice scholarly read. The very first book of Grover Cleveland that I read was actually, I bought it at the train station in D.C. and read it on the train ride back. And that was An Honest President, The Life and Presidencies of Grover Cleveland by H. Paul Jeffers. Not a bad read.
That's right. You've also got the American President Series biography of Cleveland by Henry Graff. And you've got Charles Lockman, who wrote A Secret Life, The Lies and Scandals of President Grover Cleveland.
That's right, and it says that on the cover, but on the inside it says Secret Life, The Sex, Lies, and Scandals of President Grover Cleveland. And a little bit about the author. He's an executive producer for Inside Edition, so when you read this, you kind of know what you're getting into.
Yeah, if you want a tabloid-style takedown of President Cleveland.
There you go.
Especially his bastard child and the alleged rapist of Cleveland to produce that as well. It's about as negative as you can get about Cleveland, personally.
That's it.
And then, well, as of the time of this recording, there's a new Cleveland biography coming out within the month.
That's right.
We're not able to read it yet, but maybe as you're listening, it might be out. It's called A Man of Iron, The Turbulent Life and Improbable Presidency of Grover Cleveland by Troy Senik. Mr. Senik undoubtedly upset that he wanted to make the new definitive account on Cleveland, and he was scooped by the Dead Presidents podcast who made any further word on Cleveland unnecessary.
Swoops, beat him to the punch. That's just it. A man of iron. Grover Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose that'll bring us to some final words on Cleveland. As always, not from ourselves, from his contemporaries. First off, we have Senator Benjamin Tillman of South Carolina at the 1896 Democratic Convention, saying thus: As Grover Cleveland stands for gold monometallism, we have repudiated him. You ask us to endorse his fidelity. In reply, I say he has been faithful unto death, the death of the Democratic Party. We have denounced him in South Carolina as a tool of Wall Street, and what was prophecy then is history now.
Well, speaking of history, we have historian Woodrow Wilson saying in 1907, quote, In the midst of the shifting scene, Mr. Cleveland personally came to seem the only fixed point. He alone stood firm, and gave definite utterance to principles intelligible to all.
There you go, fellow Democrat Woodrow Wilson. In 1888, Frederick Douglass said the following, quote, "Suppose it be granted that Mr. Cleveland is a just man and desires to protect colored citizens in the exercise of their constitutional rights. What is he, and what is any man in the presidential chair without the support of his party? As against his party, he is only as a feather against a whirlwind. In the hands of his party, Mr. Cleveland is as clay in the hands of the potter."
Well, then in 1906, we got Mark Twain.
That's it. Old Sam Clemens.
I believe he said this in a letter to Cleveland. "Your patriotic values have won for you the homage of half the nation and the enmity of the other half. This places your character upon a summit as high as Washington's. When the votes are all in a public man's favor, the verdict is against him. It is sand, and history will wash it away. But the verdict for you is rock, and will stand."
There you have it. Grover Cleveland. An interesting and non-consecutive journey
Indeed.
into uncovering President Cleveland, our 22nd and 24th president. And what better way to really put the icing on the cake, that is Grover Cleveland, than to leave with another song.
Yep, we usually end with a constitutionalist song about the president in question.
That's right.
We already gave you a Grover Cleveland song in episode 22, but we have another song to sum up the entire Cleveland-Harrison-Cleveland era.
That's right. This is the Constitutionalist, and this is Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland. For the Dead Presidents Podcast, I'm Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
And I'm James J. Hamilton.
Thanks for listening.
Sensible and responsible women do not want to vote. The relative positions to be assumed by man and woman in the working out of our civilization were assigned long ago by a higher intelligence than ours. The blood of victory is always in the truth. Great lies never go out, they go on. Will the people support the government should not support the people. I have tried so hard to do right.